I stood with my face looking over her head. She looked forward at the back of our colleague. We were standing there in lines of 4, all facing forward. The first in the line was shown a photo by the workshop facilitator. Back towards the back of our quartet lines, we didn't know what the photo was. The instructions were simple. The person in front was to take the photo and absorb it, to look carefully at it, hand it back to the facilitator, and then turn around and look into the eyes and the face of the person behind them. No words were spoken, and after what felt like 5 minutes or more, the second in line turned to the third, me, looking at me, and I looking back. No words exchanged. And then I turned to the last. When we finished, we described what we saw in the face of the person in front of us. I saw sorrow and helplessness, sadness and pain. That sorrow and helplessness and sadness and pain was deep in the exchange before me, and then we found out why. The pain and the sorrow and the helplessness and the sadness was the kind I saw again this week, standing with clergy from all over the city of Dallas, black and white and Asian and Native and all kinds. It was the look of those who had watched a video of a policeman, I don't think saying his name is helpful here, knee on the neck of George Floyd, who had been accused of passing off a counterfeit bill. If you have seen the video, you know the look in the eye, in the face, that I saw in that exercise with my colleagues. Sorrow, helpless, sad, and pained. Because that look is real. And it's what we are feeling in the midst of all this pandemic mess, and with few leaders to help us and others who seem severely out of touch. We realize in this moment that this isn't the last time we will go through this, not a pandemic and not such violence. I saw sorrow, helplessness, sadness, and pain in the face of my colleague, which she received without ever seeing the picture that the first person in line saw. And I received it, and I passed it down the line. And after the exercise, we sat in a circle together and passed around the image that the first had seen in the line. It was one of those postcards from the early 1900s in the United States, somewhere near here, perhaps a state away, of a black body mutilated and hanging from a tree. And the faces of 1,000 white people, men and women and children and elders, turned toward the camera, all dressed for a spectacle that they had come to see. In their faces was a blank emotion of resolve that something right and something just had happened there. In our faces, looking back on history, was sorrow and helplessness, sadness and pain. And the exercise proved its point. The point was that no generation gets off easily from the traumas of the past. That nothing has to be said to pass on the discomfort and pain or the racism. That look your mother gave you when you brought home a new friend she didn't approve of. That offhanded comment from a relative about your black colleague. That flip thing someone said about how white your friend was, comes with pain and division that is passed on without words even, and put in you right there, then and there, reminding you of the construct of racism or division that you are supposed to uphold. And we learn that often things left unsaid are worse on us and on our children than things said, because they are read in our bodies and in our faces. They speak volumes, especially those that are painful. And every time a parental figure said, "Never you mind," they were saying something with their faces. and passing on a trauma that has existed since the beginning of this country. No one has to tell you today that we continue to replicate and exact the traumas we receive, whether we know it or not, until a man puts his knee on another's neck, like in a cage fight, and doesn't release it for 5 minutes and 53 seconds of kneeling before the man was unresponsive, followed by 2 minutes and 53 seconds of continued pressure. That totals just less than 9 minutes, and then we all feel the pain of it. This week in The Atlantic, a writer simulated this action and said, after about 1 minute, the throb in my knee turned decisively to pain and stress. I could feel my muscles rebelling, asking me why I was doing this. He said, I could imagine pinning a man with my knee, using all that force to hold him still if necessary, but any sentient, moral creature should feel that pressure applied like this. It is an attempt to maim. The revulsion is natural. Whatever I have been leaning into is by now broken, he said. The joint is torqued and sprained, the fascial tissue smeared or torn, the skin and muscle bruised, the major organ permanently injured or worse. The sorrow, the helplessness, sadness, and pain in the words I can't breathe with, which have been uttered and echoed in us today and forever as we ponder the violence of the act and the violence of the passive bystanders who have now been charged with doing nothing to prevent a death. And that sadness and pain has now been in the streets and is in us. And we ask, what do we do with it? Martin Luther King, in his eulogy for Unitarian minister James Reeb, who was beaten in Selma in 1965, said, it's not enough to ask who killed the man in this case of James Reeb. We have to ask what killed him. And we know what killed him. A deep racism that runs through the core, that has killed and has segregated economically and put people in power who refuse to see complexity and human beings suffering. And it has put us in situations where we are so fragile that a pandemic can put millions out of work and thrust the already poor and working people deeper into economic despair. It has put us in a position of calling the idea of having health care for all socialism as if it was a dirty word that leaves thousands of people to die each year just because they are uninsured. We know what has killed George Floyd as much as we know who, and it is painful. We must refuse to be comforted now. The sorrow and the pain shakes us to addressing it, to confront the trauma and not in silence. We can't put the hurt away and say we want normalcy. We have to feel it. We have to know that those who have been rejected over and over again are telling us that this is too screwed up to be real, but that it is real. We have to listen to the book of Lamentations. It says, how deserted lies the city once so full of people. How like a widow is she who once was great among nations. She was the queen among provinces and now becomes a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night. Tears are upon her cheeks. Arise, cry out in the night. In the beginning of the watches, pour out thine heart like water. Remember my affliction and my misery. My soul hath them still in remembrance and is humbled in me. This I recall to mind. And then the Lamentation says something else. This I recall to my mind, all my suffering, all that has been given to me through the generations. But it says, therefore have I hope. We must refuse to be comforted now, refuse to seek easy answers and easy scapegoating as diversions. It's easy to point to the riots that were earlier in the week and say the violence proves something, but such statements only prove we can't handle the pain both the rioter and the observer have. We have to remember a man was killed in front of us, and our pain and sorrow and helplessness and sadness comes from a deeper place within us that has been given to us from generations of such violence. We have to remember this also, that together we are not alone, that we can confront this. We can find our way together to do something. Remember that slavery and voting discrimination and segregation have changed, even while so much has not changed. The hope the Lamentations speak of says, together we can see the connectivity I spoke of earlier with Daryl, when a policeman steps out of the line and into the crowds and encourages the protests, encourages them, and does it with heart. That gives us hope. When people in the church like ours say they'll throw themselves into loving conversations that might make them feel like they have a lot to learn and a lot to hear, but they go anyway, that is hope. Assata Shakur, a U.S. dissident living in exile in Cuba after 40 years of exile, wrote this poem. I think she speaks directly to the inherited pain we have and the hope that remains. She says, I believe in living. I believe in life. And I have seen the death parade march through the torso of the earth, sculpting mud bodies in its path. I have seen the destruction of the daylight and seen bloodthirsty maggots prayed to and saluted. I have seen the kind become blind and the blind become the bind in one easy lesson. I have walked on cut glass. I have eaten crow and blunder bread and breathed the stench of indifference. I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy. And if I know anything in all, it's that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be broken down, she says. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and in the fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship, steered by tired, seasick sailors, can still be guided home to port. So I'm saying to you today, we have to hold out hope that even a tired and seasick people will sail the ship home and that we will be part of it. The questions to ponder include, will we put our bodies in the way of the pain and become a solution? Will we address the generations of pain and suffering that we have inherited and take a turn for the better? Not remain silent so that our children absorb our silence, but speak the truth. Last Sunday, I stood in a crowd of pastors. I debated with myself about going. I let myself excuse myself because of COVID, but then I went anyway and masked myself and socially distant. I kneeled with pastors and people from all over Dallas in prayer. As we kneeled on the hard ground, I could feel how hard this was for anyone at all. The hard ground pushing back up and saying, I can't breathe. And then we stood together, and I knew we could accomplish something great with our spirit that was strong and resilient. I don't know what and when and where yet. I am open to the fact that I don't have the answers to this, and it's complicated, but I am open to the fact that we can't sit back and blame others and wonder if it'll all get better while passing on a trauma that rose to the surface of us all this past week. We are tired and seasick, but we can still sail the ship home. It will mean discomfort. It will mean spoken traumas and hard discussions and political will to change economic systems of inequity. all of which is a tall order. But every single one of us can do something today that moves forward the movement that makes our world a better place. We can give money to Mothers Against Police Brutality. We can go to the next protest and put ourselves in its way to say it's not right to remain silent. We can talk with a neighbor. We can teach our children something we have held in secret that they already know because of the pain on our faces. We can and we will. A single person can be killed and discredited. We have seen this with our own eyes. But the poet says, 2 can keep each other sane. 3 are a delegation, a wedge. 4 can start an organization. 6 can hold a fundraiser. 12 make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity. 10,000 power. 100,000 affect the media. 10 million your own country. When we studied this poem this week, a member of our poetry class on Monday simply, right at the end, wrote, "Choosing to stand alone is the easy way. Choosing to stand together is no easy path. Strength in numbers with focused intent through the bonds of fellowship and community. It takes courage to stand up with others and for what you believe in." Friends, we can and we will heal this trauma. I don't know how, and I'm okay with that. All I know is that we will. We will talk again. I love you all. When we say it together, let us say it from our heart. Amen and amen.